those two concepts, throw them out the window, because whether you like it or not, whether the judges like it or not, not even the judges are not necessarily like, oh, this is the perfect scoring system. What's up, guys? Laura Sanko here, and I want to make a video about my thoughts on Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley and the controversy surrounding that decision. Yeah, I'm a little late to the game because I had road to UFC duties on Sunday and then a 26-hour journey home. So I realized that there are already a million videos out there discussing this topic. Mine's certainly not the first, but it's kind of actually given me a chance to get an idea of I don't know, the pulse, I guess, of where people's thoughts are on this, and so I can hopefully kind of add to this conversation. I don't. I want to start with this. I don't purport myself to be the expert on MMA judging. There are a lot of very educated media members. Um, there are a lot of the commentators at this point are more educated than we used to be. I'm not the only person that is educated on these things, but I do want to remind everyone because even when I posted on Twitter, I tweeted out like, "Hey, I'm gonna be doing a video on this. Biggest takeaway, not a robbery." And even just saying not a robbery, I was getting like, "You're a idiot," and da 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 da. I'm not. And I am a judge. I am a licensed judge, and not a lot of people can say that they are a licensed judge. And I've done extensive coursework and passed a test and all of those good things. So again, I'm not saying I'm the expert, but I am attempting to be an expert in this area. And it's one I've put a lot of work and thought into. So that being said, I probably know more than your buddy that you watch the fights with. I'm just going to go out there, unless he's also a judge, in which case maybe not. No sense in bearing the lead here, and that really is kind of the takeaway: is that this decision for Sean O'Malley, the split decision for Sean O'Malley, is not a robbery by any stretch of the imagination. This is not a robbery, and I know that a lot of people are really pissed off by that. And I think that there's some interesting reasons for that. I think people obviously are very passionate fans, and when their fighter doesn't win, it feels like a robbery. And I'll tell you this much too. Sorry, my thoughts are kind of all over the place. I understand why people felt very adamantly that Yan won the fight if they're not educated on the scoring criteria. And a couple of things. One thing I'm not going to do in this video actually is give you my specific thoughts on the fight. I'll give some of them, but I'm not going to give all of them, because the reality is, unless I was sitting cage side, which I actually was sitting cage side, but unless I was sitting cage side and watching this fight fresh with the idea of scoring it, it's really not fair for me to render an official scorecard as a judge. I am going to give you my thoughts, but I guess that's my point, is like, I don't really want to slide an official ballot your way. I don't want to slide an official scorecard your way, because although I was sitting cage side, I was literally right behind DC, who was calling the fight. So I was, 3 feet away from being at the octagon apron. I wasn't elevated like a judge, and I was not. I just wasn't scoring it. I was watching as a fan for once, which was really kind of fun to do, actually. So my watching it as a judge happened after I got home, and I could only see the camera angles that the commentators could see, which in some ways works for you, in some ways works against you. I've talked to you guys about that in the past. The judges do have monitors, but again, they're really meant to judge from what they can physically see. So again, you're not always going to have, where you sit can sometimes influence what you see, and what you see influences what you score. So again, like I said in the last video about judging, when someone has a score that is different than the other two, it doesn't mean he's a dumbass. It means he saw different things. And the reality is that all of these scorecards, all three judges had very reasonable and correct scorecards. That's what's so hard. And it was really hard for me when I was doing the judging courses. It's like I wanted there to be a right answer and a wrong answer. I wanted it to be black and white. He won, he did not win. And when it comes down to these razor thin fights, there is often a situation where there is not a perfect right. There's not a 100% and a 100% incorrect answer, 100% correct and 100% incorrect. You'd have to have, you know, a sample size of like 50 judges, all sitting cage side, all not able to hear, all having the exact same audio and visual experience, and then see how, what the percentages come out to be. And we don't have that situation. I can tell you from experience that all three of these judges are very, very good judges. I want to put that out there for sure. Two of them I know personally, one of them I know by reputation, but all three of them are top notch. And I would say like the cream of the crop in terms of MMA judges. And the two that I know well are the ones that scored it for Sean O'Malley. And I know in particular that those two judges are some of the best judges, not just in Europe, but in all of MMA. They're also active combat athletes. Like this idea that these guys are just, they have no practical experience and they don't know what they're looking at. Like one of them is a brown belt. So that narrative, not every judge is a brown belt by any stretch of the imagination. That's not true. Some of them are black belts, some of them are black belts in karate. There is a large portion of judges who hold ranks in various martial arts, most of them in jiu-jitsu, because I think we can all agree that that's an art that certainly benefits you to understand when you're looking at some of these really technical grappling exchanges. But that particular thing wasn't really a factor in this fight. I just want to put that out there. Like these are good judges. They're not dumb. And another narrative that I would like to say my piece on, this idea that like the UFC didn't want Petr Yan to win. That's absolutely crazy. Like it's just crazy. And even if it were true, like the relationship between the UFC and the judges does not exist. Like these judges are not hanging out. They're not like part of the scene when we go on these trips. They are very separate and apart by intention, because they're so they defend their lack of conflict of interest so vehemently. Like they're so adamant that they not have any, conflicts of interest. Now, of course, they might know a few people here and there, but so did judges who judge legal cases, right? The type of person who takes on that responsibility is the type of person who takes off any hat of like, oh, I know this person, or oh, I've met this person, or whatever. Oh, I watch the sport. I'm a fan of this. Like that's their job, is to sit there and make a judgment call. And that's the other thing I want to say before I talk about the specifics of the fight. At the end of the day, this is a subjective thing. As much as I learned through the many, many hours of coursework and the testing that I did, at the end of the day, there will always be a bit of subjectivity to it. And this round one in particular of Yan versus O'Malley is where that subjectivity comes into play. It doesn't make one person right and it doesn't make the other person wrong. And it's really annoying to accept that, because then we can't go to war on YouTube and like say mean things and, stir up shit, whatever. But it's just the truth. Like the judge who scored it for Yan, perfectly acceptable and correct scorecard. The judges who scored it for O'Malley, perfectly acceptable and correct scorecards. So now I want to get into like what I think that they saw. Now, it's a little bit dangerous for me to do that because I don't want to make assumptions, but having been trained the way that they were trained, I feel like I'm probably in a decent position to be doing that, maybe more than the average layperson. They are instructed not to not to talk to the media. So it's also, by the way, not them being like, oh, I'm ashamed of what I wrote down and I don't want to talk about it. Um, that comes from layers up. It has nothing to do with the UFC at all. It has to do with the ABC and the various commissions not wanting the media to become a part of the judging ecosystem, which I wish that there was more transparency, because I wish I could like sit down with these judges and have them walk me through like, oh, and then I saw this and then I saw that. That just is what they're not allowed to do that. I wish that they did, but they're not allowed to. So, and I actually do kind of understand some of the reasons why um, there could be potentially negative things that would come with judges just running to media or running to YouTube and like talking about various things. So in lieu of that, I'm going to do my best to tell you what I saw as a trained judge and why this is not a robbery for either side. And because people are mostly on the side of seeing it yawn, and again, I saw it that way when I was sitting cage side at the fights, but I was not watching it as a judge. I was watching it as a fan. And when I watched it back, and I watched it as a judge, I understand why the two judges gave round one to O'Malley. That's the biggest takeaway. As a fan, I saw yawn. As a judge, I could see either, but I think I know what they were looking at when they scored it for O'Malley. And two things I want to talk about. So I started watching MMA in 2003. I started training in 2006. So that's oh God, I'm getting old. 16 years, 16 years of training, 19 years of watching very intently. And only until about 2 years ago, and especially in the last year, do I actually know what I'm looking at in terms of scoring. I spent 18 years not understanding the judging criteria. I fought. Now, I'm not saying I fought that much, people get so worked up when I say I fought. I fought 8 times total between my amateur and pro fights. Okay. I, for whatever reason, never took the time to really understand the judging criteria. Seems like we should, but we don't. A lot of us don't. I grew up in an era where we'd be shadow boxing and a coach would yell out, steal the round. And everybody knew what that meant. It meant you sprawled or you shot a takedown. It was like so ingrained and understood that takedowns steal rounds. Or I'm trying to think of another good example. Getting on top. You're on top, you're winning. Those two concepts, throw them out the window, because whether you like it or not, whether the judges like it or not, not even the judges are not necessarily like, oh, this is the perfect scoring system. It's just the scoring system that they are required to work within. And I'm telling you that takedowns and being on top are two things that are vastly misunderstood. And kind of within that arena, or maybe the overarching concept that's vastly misunderstood, is this idea of control, right? Control. So in round one, and again, I'm gonna talk to you about why I think those two judges scored it for Sean O'Malley in the moment, because I want this to be sort of like the devil's advocate video. It's not necessarily, when I watched it back again, I could see it either way, but I'm going to tell you what I think they saw, because that's what people are like, I don't get it. So when you watch it back, the biggest thing that judges are always looking for is damage, right? Damage in terms of striking and damage in terms of grappling. Damage in terms of striking is primarily going to be very impactful shots of any type. Secondarily, so like one big shot is more important than 3 small shots that land. So for instance, like one right hand that really lands is more important than 3 jabs. Now, anytime I make a statement like that, it's really difficult, because the reality is, well, is it a Kamaru Usman jab? Because if it's a Kamaru Usman jab, then yeah, that's like, that actually is more important than a right hand that lands, but like gets no reaction. But you have to speak in generalities if you're going to start to like noodle out any of these ideas of what was seen. So of course there can be jabs that are more important than backside strikes, but in general, the power strikes are more important than the volume strikes. So take that idea. On the ground, damage or effective grappling, I should say, is mostly seen in advancing position, which is scores a little, sub attempts, which scores a lot, especially the deeper and the more close those sub attempts are to finishing the fight, and ground and pound. There's obviously not all ground and pound is created equal. There's like little rabbit punches. I feel like someone's going to cut that and meme it, but anyway, I'll leave it there. There's rabbit punches, and then there's big punches where you posture up. There's elbows that cut you right open. Obviously, not all those things are created equal, but it's all ground and pound. So those are the big things that judges are looking for, and like a cheat code that you can always use to score a round, or can like use to sort of start to score a round. Who was closer to finishing the fight? Was there anybody closer to finishing the fight? And in this round, it's really tough. Like it's hard to say anybody was really approaching closing, finishing the fight. So that's not overly helpful. Then you really have to start to look at individual strikes and situations. The things that people are pointing to for Petr Yan are the takedowns. The first takedown is not a takedown in the sense that Sean never touches, a knee never touches. Now, he is a downed opponent because he chooses to put his hands down on the mat to avoid getting a knee in the head by Petr Yan. But Petr only takes the back. It's a body lock situation. And I think he foot stomps him and then throws a knee as they're breaking apart, but the knee doesn't really land. So what people need to understand about that situation is that Petr Yan grabbing Sean O'Malley and being behind him with a body lock barely scores at all. That is simply a change of position. Takedowns in themselves matter, but they don't matter very much. So that idea is really important for people to understand. Takedowns matter. It's not that they don't score at all, but they don't matter very much. It's what you do with the takedown that really scores. It's the ground and pound that you get once you've taken the guy down. It's the submission attempts or the advancing of position that you do once you get the takedown. Now, if there's a world in which you and I are fighting and we're just like staring at each other for 4.5 minutes, we've seen fights like this, not very many, thank God. But just imagine, now this is a completely unrealistic scenario. Well, mostly an unrealistic scenario. But you kind of have to go through these somewhat unrealistic exercises to understand the spirit of the law that's behind the letter of the law. And in this situation, when I say takedowns don't count for much, but they do count a little, imagine a round where we do absolutely nothing. And at some point, you shoot a double leg on me and you end up in my guard, and that's how the round finishes. We did absolutely nothing. No strikes were thrown, but you got a takedown. You're going to win that round because that was an offensive maneuver. But in a fight where other things went on, maybe I landed a big right hand and you shot a takedown, my right hand matters more than your takedown. Probably. Again, it's really hard to say that in a vacuum because I need to see footage of that right hand to really understand it. But I can tell you with pretty good assurance, the right hand matters more than the takedown. So the first takedown wasn't really a takedown. It was a back take. And not a whole lot was done with it other than controlling Sean. And again, control, this idea of controlling someone, although like I'm a grappler, I was never a very good striker. Grappling is my main art. And so like, it's painful to me to tell you that control counts for almost nothing in a fight. That's hard for me to say because I'm like, man, I have to work freaking hard to control someone on the ground. That's hard work. That should count for something. We can debate that all day. There's probably a lot of judges that be like, yeah, I know, I agree. It's not how they are taught and required to score a fight. It does not count. The control goes down to that third tier that I talked about in the first video that almost never, I mean, you can say almost never gets scored. So being on top of someone is not scoring. That is a neutral position. It is, the takedown was a change of position that maybe scored a little bit, but being on top of someone, just being in someone's guard, gives you nothing. And if you do nothing with it and the guy from the bottom lands an elbow, that guy won the exchange, not the guy on top. So you go to the second takedown, and this is the one. This is the one that I think is probably the hinge of the round, and it's probably why a lot of fans are like, "Oh my gosh," you know? Because here's another thing that I learned that really kind of blew my mind. Not all takedowns score the same. A trip takedown is not as important, or it does not score as highly as something with a lift and impact, a slam. But for it to be a slam, the opponent's feet have to leave the canvas, and there has to be, for lack of a better term, impactful impact when they hit the mat. You got to picture like a huge suplex, like a DC, was it Gustafson or Volkov? I can't remember. DC high crotching and lifting and slamming. Like that is a slam. What happened when Petr Yan lifted Sean up is tricky, because if you are a really pure judge, I'm not saying that to see it the other way is wrong, but I can understand why a very pure judge would look at that and say that's not really a slam, because when he elevated him, Sean posted and there was not impactful impact. It was regular impact when Sean hit the canvas. Okay. So then Petr gets the takedown, which it counts for a little something, but as I stated earlier, really not very much. It's just a change of position. Okay. Petr Yan is on top of Sean O'Malley, and he lands one ground and pound shot to the body. And then Sean looks to hit the switch and starts to grapple up. Dear God, I wish that I could do the footage on this for you guys, but there's like a 10-day moratorium that we have to work with on my channel. And I wanted to get this video out before then, because in 10 days, no one's going to be talking about this. I'm already late to the party. But I think one day I'd like to get together some of the most controversial rounds and then like actually go through the footage, maybe the home beer round 3, this one. And then I would love for you guys to suggest other rounds that just really baffled your mind. And I'll try to do my best to talk through them. Anyway, he lands like a short little body shot, not much, to be honest. And then that was about it. And then Sean gets up. So again, while he was held there for, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds, I'd have to go back and count it up. Petr Yan didn't score with anything big when Sean was on the ground. And on second watching, when I went back and watched it, and by the way, I am not alone in this. There were 3 MMA Junkie media members who I know are incredibly well versed in the scoring as well, who I don't know if all of them were there. I know that at least one of them was there, but I don't know if the other 2 were or not. All 3 of them scored it for Yan in the moment, and all 3 of them scored it for O'Malley after the fact. That's how close this round was. And that's really the takeaway, is like, nobody's wrong here. No one needs to be burning down the city because Sean O'Malley won this fight because of this round. But on second watching, and even cage side, I'll tell you this, like, it's hard to judge impact at home. But when I watched it, like, some of Sean's strikes were pretty freaking clean. Like, he lands, I want to say 2 or 3 big, he switches stances so much that I can't remember if they're right hands or left hands. I know a couple of them are right hands. And I think one of them is a left hand, and there's an uppercut toward the end. But another thing that really kind of added to what I think those judges saw were the front kicks to the body that were sneaking in there. Now, I know that Petr Yan didn't like, oh, and he didn't react big to any of them. That's how close this round was. Neither Sean nor Petr had big reactions to anything. Sean was pushed back by a couple strikes. Petr was also pushed back by a couple strikes. Like this was a razor thin round. But I can understand why people saw it for Sean because he landed, I want to say, at least 3 clean power side shots and a number of clean body shots and a nice uppercut. And the visuals of Petr Yan holding down Sean, I think, are what is affecting the general public because the general public is not educated in the scoring criteria. And it's not that I think that the fans are dumb. I was one of those uneducated fans for freaking 15 years. I was calling I was calling fights and I didn't really understand the judging criteria. Um so I'm not saying these people are crazy. I would have been outraged also. I'm just telling you that the outrage is not warranted. As fun as it is to have on Twitter and like call people names and stir stuff up and go off, it's not warranted, unfortunately. And I will say this too. I think this whole idea that, oh, the judges are biased because the UFC wants Sean O'Malley to be a star. I actually see the flip side of it. I think a lot of the public uh expected Sean to get run through. And so there's like an expectancy bias about what we all thought was going to happen. Like we thought Petr Yan was just going to dominate him in the grappling, and Petr Yan was just going to eat him up in the boxing range. So it's like it's impossible if you're a fan. It's impossible to watch the fight and not have those biases. That's why it's so difficult to be a judge because they're forced to put any biases that they have out of their head. And if you think for a second that those judges, weren't like, well, this might be an interesting one, but I have to put out what I saw and what I think is the correct call. At the end of the day, the right answer is that there was no right answer in that first round. So as much as that sucks to say, that's the truth. But those are my thoughts. Those are some details that hopefully provide you some insight into what those two very credible, very, very good judges saw. And again, the other judge who saw it for Yan, also very credible, very good. What are you going to do? Is what it is. It's a really dissatisfying ending to a video, but it is what it is. Guys, I hope you'd enjoyed. Subscribe if you will. Hit the like button if you will. It's a big help to me. And like I said, I think I will try to put together a compilation of rounds where we can actually look at the footage and I can pause and like fast forward and really show you guys some of the details of what the judges might be seeing in various rounds that the fans aren't necessarily picking up on. And appreciate the support as always. We'll see you next time.